Imagine that you are visiting an art exhibition. You see a lot of pictures belonging to different times, and there is an attendant who introduces the pictures to the visitors. He gives information about the pictures to the visitors. He talks about how the pictures have been made, which period they belong to, about the duration of the making process, which materials and colors have been used. But he doesn't talk about which artist they belong to.
So, those of you who have debated a creationist or two likely know exactly where this Muslim is going. In fact, you probably figured it out within the first 7 words.
Imagine that you are visiting an art exhibition.
Yep, it's William Paley's watchmaker analogy. Whoa, wait a sec. That's a sexy looking card, isn't it? In fact, do you know what? I reckon it should be part of a card game in which players earn points by debunking arguments just like it. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Especially if, say, the Kickstarter was to be released in 2 weeks' time, huh? Okay, back to business. Stated simply, the watchmaker analogy is a teleological argument for the existence of God which asserts, by way of analogy, that design implies a designer, or more accurately, that complexity requires a designer. Proponents assert that just as a watch implies a watchmaker and a painting or pictures requires a painter or illustrator, life must require, so they insist, a life maker.
By explaining how Allah created all these things, you don't cut off the fact that there is a creator.
It was once, in my opinion, the greatest argument for a god. In fact, it convinced me of deism until the age of 9. But then I discovered evolution by natural selection, which absolutely annihilates the argument. And I'll explain exactly why in just a moment. This is A Painting Proves Allah Exists, Debunked.
Then you suddenly ask, excuse me, to which artist do these pictures belong to? The answer is surprising. Sir, there is no artist of these pictures. I gave you some information about how they were made, which period they belong to. Why are you asking? Why are you looking for an artist? You have already known how it's made. Now, what would be your reaction? Can anyone make you believe that what attendant says is right? Of course not. By explaining how Allah created all these things, you don't cut off the fact that there is a creator. We believe in a creator who is behind the curtains and who offers his blessings by using all these reasons.
Now, those of you who are well acquainted with my channel will likely know that I've already thoroughly debunked the watchmaker analogy in a previous video, but truth be told, it's pretty dated now. I mean, look at how young and awkwardly close to the camera I was. I mean, seriously, I was so damn close. And white! That's racist! But if creationists are going to keep using the same old arguments, albeit them slightly altered, then we, the rational, are going to keep using the same rebuttals, albeit them appropriately altered. However, with that said, for the purpose of context, it's worth first succinctly recapping the argument's history. It was first fully fledged in 1802 by William Paley in his book titled Natural Theology, who essentially put it as follows. If you were to find a pocket watch lying upon the ground, you would not assume that it was produced by nature's randomness.
A beautiful watch began ticking one day, formed all by itself, in a wonderful way. Ridiculous story, you say with a grin. Impossible, laughable, surely a sin.
Indeed, you would assume, due to its complexity, it must have had a creator who consciously and deliberately willed it into existence. Likewise, Paley argued, because life is so incredibly complex, we can infer that there must have been a life creator, and we ought to call this creator God. It was, and to my great annoyance still remains, an incredibly popular argument.
I just wanted to give you guys something to think about here. Let's suppose you were walking down like a path, like in a creek. You're in the woods or something, and you come across a watch.
Time out.
And what's more, since Paley's time, theists and deists have conjured countless additional versions of the argument in which they simply substitute Paley's watch with something more culturally relatable, such as, say, literature.
Okay, I want you to imagine we walk a little bit further down the beach, and you see in the sand it says, John loves Mary. And you say, hey Joe, how did that get into the sand? And I say to you, oh yeah, it was the waves again. The waves did that. Are you going to believe me? You're not, are you? Because you know that nature cannot create something so finely tuned in such a small area, can it? Why is it? Why is our universe so finely tuned if we just came from accident, if we just came from nature's randomness?
And, of course, today's most popular version, paintings.
Imagine you're standing looking with awe at what you think is the most beautiful painting ever painted. Imagine now that you're back looking at that incredible painting, and there's a man beside you who is raving about it just as much as you did. But when he finds out that the person next to him is the actual painter, he spits on him, he cusses him out, and for some unknown reason, adamantly denies that the painting even had a painter. Then he says the unthinkable. He says, it happened by accident.
But that's enough examples, I hear you crying.
Enough is enough! I have had it with these motherfuckers
Analogies
on this motherfucking
planet.
Everybody strap in! I'm about to open some fucking
Fallacies. The first reason the watchmaker analogy is flawed is because it commits a false analogy fallacy. It erroneously asserts that because two things share one quality in common, that being, in this case, complexity, they therefore must share another quality in common, that being, in this case, a creator, but this simply cannot be logically concluded. It's as fallacious, for example, as asserting that because paintings and humans share the quality of complexity, they must also share the quality of consciousness. The point being, of course, is that just because two objects share one thing in common, such as complexity, that doesn't necessarily mean that they share another, such as a creator. Now, it's important to note that this objection alone defeats the argument. Like, really, it's game over. That is, unless the proponent can prove that complexity can only come from a conscious creator. And this leads us perfectly to the second fallacy that the argument commits, a false cause. It does this, as just indicated, by attributing a sole cause and effect relationship between complexity and consciousness, despite the fact that such a relationship has not been proven to exist. Sure, we can infer that watches are the product of watchmakers, and paintings are the product of painters, but the reason we can do this actually has nothing to do with complexity. Rather, it's because we have observed literally millions of these items being produced by conscious entities, and not one ever being produced in any other way. However, and conversely, we have observed literally millions of complex organisms, but have not once ever seen one being produced by a conscious entity. We do, however, have overwhelming evidence that such complexity, such seemingly deliberate design, can and has been produced by the unconscious force that is evolution by natural selection. And here lies the third flaw with the watchmaker analogy. It completely and utterly ignores evolution by natural selection.
But actually, they don't know that we Muslims accept science already.
No, you don't. You accept science that doesn't conflict with your Iron Age worldview, and you misrepresent and ignore science that does, such as evolution. Now, I've created numerous videos on this topic, each saturated with evidence and resources, and so for this video I'll keep it brief by saying, we know for a fact that the unconscious process that is natural selection has given rise to countless complex and purposed organisms, which, admittedly, without an understanding of natural selection, do radiate the illusion of conscious design. So there, in my opinion, are the three most damning flaws of the watchmaker analogy. However, those who employ the argument very frequently commit additional fallacies, and I think it's worth noting the most prominent, and so that's what I'm going to do. The first I'd like to illuminate, and one that proponents, at least in my experience, seriously struggle to understand, is that of special pleading. If, as they insist, complexity requires a creator, then by applying the argument's logic to its own conclusion, we can insist that the creator, with all of his or her complexity, must also have a creator, and so on and so forth. Hence, the argument is utterly self-defeating. Even if correct, all it would establish is turtles all the way down. That is, unless the advocate creates an exception to their logic without justification, which, of course, is exactly what they do.
By definition, God is the uncreated creator of the universe.
Right.
So the question, who created God, is actually an illogical question.
Yeah, well, I define the universe as the uncreated universe. See the problem? A second fallacy that proponents very frequently commit is the black and white fallacy. They tend to insist that either their God created life / the universe / whatever, or that pure random chance did.
A beautiful watch began ticking one day, formed all by itself in a wonderful way.
Why is it? Why is our universe so finely tuned if we just came from accident? If we just came from nature's randomness?
Then he says the unthinkable. He says it happened by accident.
But God and random chance are not the only options, are they, Darwin? And even if evolution wasn't established, even if it wasn't the bedrock of biology, the proponents of the watchmaker analogy would still have the burden of proof to substantiate their black and white assertion, which, of course, they don't even attempt to do. The third most prominent fallacy additionally committed by those who wield the watchmaker analogy is a non sequitur. More often than not, they act as if the argument establishes monotheism, a single god hypothesis, and many even act as if it establishes their very specific god. But the truth is that even if the argument was valid, it wouldn't even substantiate monotheism. Think about it. If you saw a shoe lying on the ground, would you assume that it was created by a painter? No, you wouldn't. You would assume that it was created by a shoemaker. Or, funny enough, by an unconscious machine. But that's a whole other avenue. Hence, if the argument was valid, it would follow that humans have a human maker, rabbits have a rabbit maker, mountains have a mountain maker, suns have a sun maker, and so on, implying that there are many gods, not just one.
Allah.
Now, there are many more fallacies that advocates of this argument tend to commit, and most of which are covered in my original video. But as for this one, I'm ready to wrap up. And so, to recap, the watchmaker analogy is flawed because it commits a false analogy fallacy, a false cause fallacy, and it completely ignores the bedrock of science that is evolution by natural selection. And proponents of the watchmaker analogy frequently additionally commit a special pleading fallacy, a black and white fallacy, and a non sequitur. Anyhow, as always, I'm Stephen Woodford, or Rationality Rules, and thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have supported the channel via merchandise and PayPal. If you're interested in the aforementioned Debunked card game, which I really hope you are, know that should things go according to plan, the Kickstarter will be released around the 15th of February. Anyhow, until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.